Hey, all right. We were having some technical difficulties. It's Commissioner in the car again. Here I am, Dustin Zarni, and I'm trying to talk to you about a few things today. There's a lot of things that we're going to talk about, whether it's election security or how New York State protects your right to vote and why we don't see some of those things that we see in other states. We're just going to wait a few seconds, see if anybody joins us live here, and we'll see if we can get that out to people here. So hold on one second, but a few seconds, see if anybody joins us live here. Oops, that's my tablet here. We just have a little technical difficulties this morning. Sorry about that. So, no, David, I'm not going to get you something from the Burger King, but you did see where I was, didn't you? That's something that I always try. That's why I started doing these Commissioner of the Cars, is because no matter where I'm at, I can, put them out there and see if other people want to see it. So, that's what's going on here. We're going to wait for a couple more people to join, and then I'm going to talk to you about some things. So, I hope you'll be able to tune in or share the video, and other people will see it as well. And again, if you're not watching this live, if you're watching this sometime in the future, go ahead and ask a question if you want, and I'll try to answer it as best as I can. Or if it's something more of a private question about like your voter information, feel free to message me, and I'll be more than happy to try to check something out. So, but yeah, so we're going to get started here in just a second. And just trying to share this around, make sure people see it. And okay, so here we are. It is now the end of registration. Registration deadline passed on Friday. We were very busy trying to get all of the registrations and people who wanted to register to vote done. We expect a ton of registrations on Monday. As people, the deadline was Friday to mail it in and also to do it online at DMV. We're going to get all of those on Monday. So we hope that will, it's going to keep us very busy. In fact, we're going to be behind probably all week. The Board of Elections has been in mandatory overtime, and we're going to continue to be until we get this all straightened out. And get it. And, this is not something that's unusual, especially in a high volume year. It's a little unusual to be in such a high volume year here in a midterm election. We're hoping that that means that we're going to have a lot of registrations. We won't know where we're at until we're done. We kind of, put our nose to the grindstone, so to speak, and try to make sure that we are working as hard as we can to get them all processed, because by the end of this week, we need to be done, and everything has to be in so we can get our poll books done and get ready for the election this November. It's actually, as of recording this today, it is 24 days away from the election, and or is it 23? It's something like that. Yeah, it's pretty close. We're 3 weeks from Tuesday is when our election is. So we November 6th. So it's coming up. So before I get into answering some of the questions you have, again, if you have a question, pop it into those comments there, and I'll be more than happy to answer them. I know there was a couple questions that people submitted to me ahead of time that I'm going to deal with in a little bit. But first, I'm going to talk about voter suppression. Big news all week long in other states. All of these voter suppression tactics that are being instituted by state governments in these states. And I wanted to actually do something that I rarely get to do and kind of talk about what New York State gets right when it comes to elections. And that is our nonpartisan, bipartisan election boards. You see in these other states like Indiana, where they had, hundreds of thousands of voters purged right before the election. Ohio as well. Georgia, where they're freezing voter registration forms if they don't exactly match their driver's license. What we're talking about is hyper-technical stuff like a space being added to a name or a middle initial being left off a form. This is actually stuff that is pretty illegal and would have been stopped under the Voting Rights Act if that was not gutted back in 2010. And all of these states are doing this because they have what's called partisan election boards or partisan election officials that are able to do this because they are elected, either secretaries of states or sometimes county clerks. These are people that are in charge of the election system, but they are partisans. So the sole deciding authority, or maybe they have a board where there's a majority on there that are one party or another. When you have that, you allow for ideology to get in the way of serving the voters. And what we do in New York State is we have a bipartisan election board. So there's one Democratic commissioner, one Republican commissioner. What the statute actually says is the two parties with the most votes in the governor's line are the ones who staff the election boards. And if we do not agree, we have to go to court. So a lot of these things that you see happening in other counties and other states, they don't happen here in New York because of the equal status of both parties, or the both two top parties. It won't allow one person to use their ideology to determine who is eligible to vote. So these voter purges and voter registration issues that you see would just not happen in New York because the Democratic and Republican commissioners need to come to some kind of agreement ahead of time. You can't just have one person pushing the ideology. And I have to say, the Republican commissioners in New York State would never push some of this stuff. They don't push some of this stuff that you see happening in some of these other states. We disagree on who should be elected, but we normally don't disagree on how the elections should run. And while some elections commissioners and some state lawmakers want to push voter ID in New York State, which is a huge suppression tactic that has been done in other states, our state assembly, the Democratic Assembly, and having a Democratic governor for the last, I think it's 16 years now, that would never allow that to happen. So there would never be a voter ID law passed in New York State because there would be no agreement between the parties to be able to do that. So that is, so some of these voter suppression tactics that you see just would not be allowed in New York State, and that's a good thing. Another thing that you should be aware of is these voter purges that are out there. They're talked about in the in much of the country. Indiana had 400,000 voter purges. Ohio just had several 100,000 voter purges happen right before the election. In New York State, we do voter purges, but we do not do them right before an election. To be a purged voter in New York State, you have to not vote in a federal election for 2 federal elections. Also, the Board of Elections will have to get a piece of mail back saying that you do not live at the address that you have registered at. So once we get the piece of mail back, you go into what's called an inactive pile. You're not purged. And then you have 2 federal elections to try to vote. If you don't vote in those 2 federal elections, you will be slated for purge, but it won't happen until after the election day. So we will be doing a whole bunch of purges in January. However, if somebody votes in that time frame in any of those 3 to 5 years that they're there, they will no longer be eligible to be purged. So a lot of people bring up the presidential primary, where there was a purge done in Brooklyn. That purge was done illegally. It was done by a Republican elections official. And what happened there is, instead of waiting until after the election, the voters that were scheduled to be purged, she did before the election, and that was wrong. And but that was not a case of New York having a system of purges that happened. It was an error by one election official that should not have happened, and I believe they put in safeguards to keep that from happening again. But it was in Brooklyn County, New York. It was right before the presidential primary. A lot of passion was already in that primary, so that, you know, a lot of people remember that purge and think, oh well, it happens all the time. It does not. So these purges you see in other states, we just simply would not do by statute in New York. We have to do it after Election Day. So this is one of the rare times where I can say New York has actually done something really good that other states don't do. And other states do it as well, but these other states that you see about voter suppression, you don't have to really worry about that in New York. That doesn't mean that you should not be vigilant. You should be vigilant. Because I want to see, if you see something that's out there, we need to know, and we'll be more than happy to investigate. But and there could always be on the ground voter suppression tactics that are not part of the Board of Election, not part of the system of government, but campaigns that may have overzealous volunteers. And if those campaigns are doing that on Election Day, you need to let the Board of Elections know, and we'll make sure that that they are conducting themselves properly. So I'm going to go and talk about absentee ballots, and then we're going to go into some questions. So if you have some questions about anything when it comes to elections, this is kind of a weird week where we're in the limbo of stuff. Feel free to ask it in the comments, and I can either answer it live or I'll answer it later. But the other thing was, I was asked about absentee ballots and when they're going out. They have been delayed, and the reason for that delay was twofold. The first thing that happened was we were ready to send out absentee ballots, and the Working Families Party changed who they were supporting for governor, and that was done pretty much at the last minute, right? We had already, at the Onondaga County Board and most boards of elections throughout New York State, had already printed ballots to send out, and then this decision was made. Once that decision was made, it put us on hold. The ballots were already printed, but we decided not to send them out because, in conjunction with that decision, since we were already going to have to reprint ballots, there were two court cases going on regarding the Supreme Court of the United States, Supreme Court. I got something on my mind right there. The Supreme Court of New York, the 5th Judicial District. There were two court cases going on at the same time. One on Friday and one on Monday, a week from last Friday and a week from tomorrow earlier. And we were waiting for those decisions. And by election law, 16104, judges are supposed to render a decision. If there's a court case that happens within 35 days of the election, judges are supposed to render a decision within 1 day of hearing that court case, or that day if possible. The courts did not do that. They did not follow their own law. One decision took it was heard on Tuesday, and they took until Thursday to decide. And one decision that was heard last Friday, they still have not rendered a decision. This will be now 10 days past when they're supposed to do it. They've also not given any communication about when a decision should be made. So we've gone on the assumption every day that a decision will come in. The state board has been notifying the judges that, this is something that is very important that county boards are waiting on. That being said, we plan on sending out absentee ballots on Tuesday. It is 3 weeks before the election. That is the day that we say on all our paperwork to expect us to send it out, although Onondaga County has always been able to do it before then. But whatever decision we have, or if there's no decision, we have to send absentee ballots on Tuesday. And if a decision comes down after that, we will have to change our absentee ballots and resend them out. This is causing a good deal of expense to the Board of Election, as you might imagine, because we have to print these ballots. We can't just send them out. So we've actually made the decision to print 2 versions of the ballot, the 2 most likely versions that will come out of this court case. And hopefully, when we go into work on Monday morning, we're going to get a decision and we're going to know what's happening. If we don't, then we're going to be very upset. And maybe apoplectic might be the best term for that. So, but we're hopeful that a decision will be made. Now, that decision should be appealed, and it's going to, it all comes down to the way the judicial conventions were held for the Republican and conservative line. There was a court case against the Democratic line that was thrown out. So it's all about whether these judges will appear on the Republican and conservative line. And that is a big deal, because if they do not appear on the Republican or conservative lines, then it's going to be hard for voters to find them. Many of them are going to survive to the Independence Party line or the Democratic line. But so I think one of them won't. I also think that it also is going to be harder for them to win those elections if they're not on the Republican and conservative lines. This is just, history tells you that people on minor party lines don't pick up as many votes. So this is an important court case. It's something that doesn't have precedent, and we're expecting a decision. But either way, we're going to send out absentee ballots on Tuesday. We have to move forward. But if something changes, we'll send out a change as well. But besides expense, when things like this happen and changes, history has shown us that when we send out another ballot, many of the people who got the first ballot and sent it in either will discard the second ballot without making the changes, even though these changes have been out there, or they'll get confused. So we're trying not to have voters be disenfranchised by this decision. We don't want to send out a piece of mail that may or may end up being wrong. So we've been waiting, and of course we've been thinking every day this week, along with our other 5 county boards, have been thinking every day this week we're going to get a decision, and we haven't. So we're really hoping for a decision on Monday. That being said, we're going to go forward on Tuesday and mail out what we have and what we believe is right at the moment. And then if we have to make changes, we will. Before anybody, accuses one side or the other at the board doing this, we're actually doing this to save as many votes as possible, on both the Democratic and Republican side when the Democratic was in play as well. Because, again, if we send out ballots and they tend to be wrong, and we resend them out, many times people will not fill out the ballots and send them back. So we're trying to make sure that everybody gets their voice heard. So David had a question here about what happens if you go to your polling place on election day and you're not in the poll book. What should you do? Well, first, before you get to election day, you should be checking your registration. Now, and a lot of people registered at the last minute, the last week and a half or so, and we're catching up on that. But by the end of this week, you should be able to see online where you're registered and what polling place you should go to vote. Now, if you moved, or there's a board error, which happens sometimes when you're printing up poll books, where a name doesn't get printed in the right poll book, or maybe sometimes an election inspector can't find you, you can do what's called an affidavit ballot. That's different than an absentee ballot. Absentee ballots that I was talking about are going to go out in the mail, and then you mail them back before Election Day. On Election Day, if you get to your polling place and you know it's your right polling place and you know you're registered to vote, you can do what's called an affidavit ballot. You request it from the inspectors. They will issue it to you in another envelope. You will fill out that envelope. The affidavit ballot will go in there, signed and sealed, and it will go to us at the board after Election Day to make rulings on, to make sure you were eligible to vote. If for some reason your vote wasn't counted, we would send you a letter telling you why your vote wasn't counted, and we would then we would actually register you, though, the correct way, because you would fill out the affidavit form. So if you weren't registered, or for some reason you showed up at the wrong polling place, we would actually register you to vote based on the information you give on the affidavit. Another question David had is, what should someone do if their name has changed recently due to a marriage, doesn't match the poll book name? Do you have to do anything special when you vote? No, you don't. You don't have to do anything special. You can, however, notify the inspector that your name has changed, and write that in the book under where your previous name was. And then we will get that when we're going through voter history and update that for you. You should also probably turn in a voter registration form, and they'll probably give that to you at the polling place. And we will then process that form, ahead of time. Again, if you've had a name change, that may be a reason why they can't find you in the polling book. So check under your maiden name or your previous name, and then you can sign it and then do an updated voter registration form that will allow you to vote that day, and then we will change it after Election Day. Does New York State have voter ID law? Are there any circumstances where you'll be asked to show ID at the polling place? We do have voter ID. What we don't have is strict photo ID, which is what has been passed in some of these other states. So New York State does have voter ID. If you are a new registrant where you have not voted before in that county, a first-time registrant, and we were unable to verify you in the Department of Motor Vehicles or the Social Security Office, we do check those two things. You give those on the form, and we check those. If we're unable to verify you, you will be asked to show a photo ID or some other form of ID at the polling place. The most common, of course, is the driver's license. But you could have a utility bill. You could have a passport. There's many different forms of ID, and they're all listed on our website, ongov.net/elections, that you may use to prove your identity for the first time you're voting. So if you're a first-time registered voter, and you're out there and you're going to exercise your right in November, make sure you go ahead and bring some ID with you, because you may be asked for an ID for the first time you vote. After that, we use your signature and we verify your signature. And if there's a challenge to your identity, there's a challenge oath. There's a whole process about that happens at the poll sites. But if you're not your first time voting in Onondaga County, you will probably not be asked for ID. And if it is your first time voting, just bring your ID with you, just in case you're asked for it, because we were unable to verify your Social Security or driver's license. Now, is there any other questions? I'm coming towards the end of this. This is a nice chunk of time here that we've spent together. But we're, again, just to sum up, the voter suppression stuff you're reading about in the paper in other states, New York State doesn't do any of that. They can't do any of that. We have a process in place, a system in place, this bipartisan Board of Elections, which is, I believe, superior to partisan election officials, and makes the counties adhere to New York State election law and not their ideology, to make sure voting is protected and safe. Yes, this is a good question that David just brought up. That people are saying that New York State BOE or other entities are calling and texting people, asking them about their voter registrations. Will the BOE ever call me about my voter registration? And if don't, well, we will call you if we have a form that is unclear. However, what we will not do is ask you to give us information. We will ask you to verify information already given to us. We will never ask you to text us. You cannot register to vote by text. You cannot register to vote by phone. You can only do that by form. It has to be a signature or done through the DMV website. So if you ever get a text asking you to text back your personal information to verify your voter registration, it absolutely is not coming from us. When we call people to verify things, and this is, again, not routine, it's very rare that we call somebody. We already have the information, or we already have some information, but we can't read the form, or we can't verify it for some reason. That is very rare. And so, and our number will appear on your cell phones coming from the Board of Elections. And if you feel like it's suspicious, hang up with whoever's calling you at 315-435-VOTE. And last question we'll take from David here. You want to be an inspector or VSS? How about becoming one? It's too late to become one this year, but we're always looking for inspectors. We need 2,000 election inspectors that go out every year and protect your vote. They are eyes and ears in the ground. So if you want to be an election inspector, feel free to give us a call at 315-435-VOTE, or go to our website, ongov.net/elections, and under the inspector tab, it'll have a way to contact us that we will put you on for classes for next year. We'll probably only have 2 elections next year, a September primary and a November election, and you have to be 18. You have to be registered to vote in this county to be an election inspector, and you also have to be willing to work on election day. You'd be surprised how many people don't want to work on election day. And it is a long day, and while we do have provisions in there for part-times, that's not something that we've been able to implement with any real success here at the board for many reasons, mainly because most of the people who want to do inspections want the full-time day, and because they want the full-time paycheck. So, but we're looking into ways to maybe see what we can do next year, but I can't promise you anything on that. So you got to be willing to work on election days, not both. You have to be definitely willing to work on the November election day, and then the primary, we don't need as many inspectors. So if you're not only able to do that in September, that's okay. Put in your request now. So, all right. Thank you very much for coming and participating in another Commissioner in the Car. Next Sunday, we'll probably be talking about how this court case wrapped up, what's going on with the absentees, and getting out to the polls on Election Day, and where you can find your polling place. So I'll see you around. Bye-bye.